So good evening, Ward 5. I'm Michelle Albert, and I'm here with my fellow Vice Chair, Dana Clausen, of the Ward 5 Democratic City Committee to host tonight's Ward 5 City Councilor Forum. I'll be moderating, and Dana will be our Zoom host and timekeeper. On behalf of our chair, Nate Klauser, wave your hand, and the entire Ward 5 City Committee, we would like to welcome our three candidates for City Councilor, Tessa Bridge, Todd Easton, and Bea Gomez. We're also thrilled to see many other Ward 5 faces here tonight, and I know that more will be trickling in as we get going. This forum is an important opportunity for voters to learn more about each candidate's views on various issues that affect both Ward 5 and the wider city. The questions we are asking are based on submissions from both committee members and constituents. The candidates have been given a general idea of some of the topics in advance, but not the specific questions. In terms of format, we will start with opening statements from each of the candidates, and then we'll move on to the questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question, and we will rotate the order in which they may speak. Dana will flash a 30-second warning card, and then when time is out, a 0 card. The candidates will then have a chance to share a closing statement based on an open-ended question. We have a lot to cover this evening, so it's important that we stick to the allotted time out of fairness and efficiency. Thank you all for being here tonight, whether as a candidate or a voter, to participate in this important democratic process. We will start with opening statements in alphabetical order by candidate. So up first is Tessa Bridge.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Tessa Bridge and I'm running for City Council in Ward 5 because I believe that Somerville can be an equitable, sustainable, and healthy community for all. There is so much that is wonderful about Somerville, and the city is not working for everyone. Many people can no longer afford to live here. Educators and other municipal workers are having to commute from faraway towns and are not able to be part of the fabric of our community. Young people and older people alike are being displaced. And although we tout Somerville's diversity as one of our community's biggest assets, we are failing to invest in policies that support people without privilege to live here. Pedestrians are being killed in our streets because we are not systematically addressing our dependence on cars, and our budget does not reflect the values we profess to hold. I am running because I am not willing to accept this status quo. Our community is at a crossroads. We have an essential question in front of us as a city. What kind of community do we want to be, and who gets to decide that? To become an equitable, sustainable, and healthy community for all, we must name the ways that power and privilege shape our policies and practices, and deeply engage with parts of our community that have not had voice in decision-making. I have done this as a racial justice organizer in Cambridge Public Schools, fighting for the transfer fee and against the FRIT waiver with Our Revolution Somerville, and fighting for a living wage for paraprofessionals with the Somerville Educators Union. We need the kind of strength, clarity of values and vision, and the experience building people power on our city council that I have consistently shown. I have fought for justice, stood up to power, and organized to build grassroots power. As city councilor, I will be transparent, dedicated, and accountable to you. I will not act in fear or turn away from a challenge, and I will advocate from a place of integrity and commitment to the values of equity and justice. I look forward to working with all of you for this community and all of its residents so that together we can build a Somerville that works for all of us.
Todd, you are up next. Thank you, Tessa.
Thank you. My name is Todd Easton, and I'm the second candidate tonight speaking to you. Thank you to the Ward 5 Democratic City Committee for hosting this event, and to my fellow candidates for participating with us tonight. Somerville has some big changes ahead, and I'm excited about the opportunities before us. My wife, Debbie, and I moved here over 20 years ago, and we've raised our 3 kids here. I've watched the city grow and change over the years, and I've been involved from the very beginning through community service. I transformed my passion for athletics into volunteer work with our local youth sports. As an avid artist and arts enthusiast, I pursued opportunities to volunteer with the Somerville Arts Council. And most recently, my passion for health and wellness pushed me to take action on food insecurity through programs like the Jewish Family and Children's Services Family Table Program and Food for Free, a weekend lunch bag program with the Somerville Public Schools. Today, I hope to continue the service as the next Ward 5 counselor. I look forward to tonight's forum.
Thank you, Todd. And next is Bea Gomez.
Thank you for having me here tonight in this Ward 5 forum. I thank you all for joining. My name is Beatriz Gomez Moacad. I'm a Puerto Rican-born architect, a resident of the city for 18 years, and I have 2 beautiful children in our public schools. I'm running for city council because I love this city with its immigrant and working class roots. I want to put my professional skills and my personal experience to work to make Somerville more equitable, more sustainable, and a place where people of all backgrounds can feel welcome and thrive. I've been active in the city for many years. I have participated in design review committees for new developments and sat on the boards of nonprofits and youth leagues. I've also been a vocal voice at times in school committee, city council, and other meetings, pointing out social inequities, language barriers, and the environmental justice of I-93. During the pandemic, I saw Somerville come together, help those in need, but I saw huge inequities that were exacerbated by language and cultural barriers. As a bilingual, bicultural Puerto Rican, I knew I needed to step up. Equity and diversity and inclusion are not theoretical issues for me. They're part of my life. To make it in this country, I had to learn to adapt and communicate and collaborate with people whose backgrounds are very different from my own. My life experience has prepared me well to serve a very diverse community and recognize the value and humanity in all our neighbors. My professional skills are also deeply relevant to Ward 5. For over 25 years, I have worked in project management, construction, planning, and affordable housing, including cutting-edge sustainable projects. I know how development works, and I will advocate for a more sustainable, equitable city. As a bike commuter and the mother of 2 children who walk freely throughout the city, I understand the need for greater traffic safety. I believe it is imperative that we encourage safer driving through both design and enforcement. I'm an unabashed advocate for education as a daughter of 2 educators. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Okay, our first topic is about affordable housing with a twist. Affordable housing is a top concern in Somerville because we want to ensure that people and families of all backgrounds and incomes are able to be part of our community. What revenue sources and policies would you use to seek to increase affordable housing? And what specific measures would you put in place to encourage design for zero carbon emissions for any new housing development? Todd, you are first.
Affordable housing seems to be the topic that I do hear about the most when I'm going door to door. Trying to figure out the best way to reach that is something that we need to put our heads together and reach into the community for ideas on how to best do that. Through conversations that I've had in the past, the city has taken lump sum payments from developers when they've made modifications to developments. Something that I think that we could look into is adding a fee to assessments to developments, especially commercial developments, that then give us money year over year that we can put towards affordable housing. I think there's other things that we might be able to look at also, but putting the pressure on commercial development to help offset our affordable housing issue is priority 1. That being said, our new zoning has put in a lot of rules in place to help us become carbon neutral. So we need to make sure that our development is following those rules and not breaching the contracts that we set with them to have developments done here in the city.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Bea?
Michelle, do you mind repeating the carbon neutral portion of the question, please?
Sure. What specific measures would you put in place to encourage design for zero carbon emissions for any new housing development?
Well, thank you again for this question. Affordable housing has been a passion of mine since I was studying architecture. And from the moment my grandmother, who was a seamstress, told me about her pride in finding a home for her mother after having a lot of insecurity in her life in terms of housing. And we need to recognize housing is an incredibly complex issue with multiple solutions. There's no one solution, but we need to understand and establish what are our goals. What type of housing, because affordable housing has many levels. There's 30% median, 50 to 60%. What policies are addressing that need, and what policies we have to address their needs. We also have to understand something in this country. Any country that has addressed their affordable housing crisis subsidizes, or in some way or another, 50% of their housing. We are nowhere close to that in Somerville. Less than 10% of our housing has deed restrictions to keep it affordable. This tells you how big the issue is. And I want to also emphasize that housing is not a temporary need. People need affordable apartments. They're not going to grow into million-dollar homes. This country sees affordable housing as a very temporary issue, and it's not. Wages are not going up. Construction costs are higher. We need to understand housing is a human right, and I hope Somerville starts shaping that discussion right here in our backyard. And I think housing is something we need to study systematically. And one way we can start addressing it is looking what our neighbors are doing. Our linkage fee is at $10 per square foot. Cambridge is at $20 a square foot. And Boston says $13. We need to also create incentives to turn commercial buildings into mixed-use developments. Is there a way that developers for commercial space will build housing? It used to be in our history that industrial manufacturing plants built housing for their workers. We should also increase the community preservation back from 1.5% to 3%. Sorry.
Thank you, Bea. Okay, Tessa.
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. And I think, the interconnection of anything we build in this city and the focus on net zero couldn't be more important. As we've just seen the recent IPCC report that came out showing, how urgent of a need this is and how dramatic of a change we need to make to sort of how we do business in all different domains. And that's absolutely true in housing. My colleagues up here have talked about how housing is the #1 issue in our city. In many ways, it's by far the #1 issue that I hear about on doors. People are desperate to be able to stay in this community and to be able to afford to live in this community in accessible and decent housing. And I think this is something that we need to use all of the tools in our toolkit to address. So one way we can get more affordable housing is by working with developers. And I think that strategy is really around holding developers accountable to meeting the things that we actually say they should do. So we need to increase the percentage of affordable units in new development. And then we need to hold developers accountable to actually building that and not slipping out with, other fees that they pay instead of actually building the units. And we need to make sure that new development is negotiated with community benefits agreements where we have residents and workers who are actually negotiating the terms of the development. And that is a lever that we can use to hold developers accountable to creating more green space and building net zero. Another thing that I would really like to see is direct investment in building affordable and social housing as a city. We have $30 million coming back to us from the Green Line. We have over $60 million coming in right now from the American Rescue Plan. And we have unprecedented commercial tax base in this city. And I would like to see that money put towards bringing land into the public domain through efforts like the Community Land Trust, through the 100 Homes program, and actually begin to build some of our own housing as a city that we can build without having to negotiate with developers, just to serve the needs of our community. And this is something that we see in other nations that have really managed to bring down the housing crisis.
Sorry, we're at time, Tessa. Thank you. Our next topic, and a good segue, is climate change. In light of the UN climate change report that came out yesterday as Code Red for Humanity, what do you see as the primary impacts of the climate crisis in our neighborhood? How would you use the position of city councilor to address these impacts in the near term? And please be specific. Bea, you are up first.
So again, this is an issue that's been passionate to me. I am a resident of an island that's right in the path of a hurricane, okay? And I witnessed what Hurricane Maria can do. I think when we address climate, we need to address a couple of factors. We need to address energy conservation. We need to address energy efficiency in our buildings. We also need to understand the power of nature in our community. Trees are such an important factor. We need to cherish them and protect them incredibly. We need to understand the factors of climate change and, stronger winds, stronger, more flooding. And that's not just flood areas, it's our soil conditions and what we can absorb. And we have to be careful about resiliency and what we build. Basement units might not be desirable in an area where you have mostly clay soils. We need to address as well transportation. We have a lot of public transportation here, but not enough. I come from an island that we have the highest number of cars per square mile of road, and I can tell you firsthand the impact that can have on your environment. We need to push for more and more and more public transportation. Remember, our cut-through traffic is about 75%. We're not going to improve it if metro area public transportation does not improve. So it's a multi-tiered factor. It's challenging. I want to remind everyone that our carbon neutral goals are not going to be achieved with today's standards, and we're going to have to be aggressive. And we also need to work with our existing building stock. That is going to be the biggest challenge. How do we retrofit it? I'm an architect who has experience in existing buildings. I know how challenging it is, and I am prepared to work on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tessa, you are up next.
Yeah, so, the climate emergency is, greater than it's ever been, and we need to take dramatic, fast, aggressive action. I am absolutely committed to making Somerville carbon neutral by 2030. This is going to require fully resourcing the departments who will need to implement the climate forward plan that has been laid out. It's going to mean that we need to bring all municipal buildings up to net zero standards for efficiency. And then we're going to have to make sure that any repairs that are done to our existing buildings are moving us in that direction. We're going to need to focus on our residential buildings. And that means that we're going to have to do things like incentivize landlords to repair their buildings, provide funding and support in our budget for homeowners and landlords to upgrade their buildings to be carbon neutral. We need to expand the infrastructure for sustainable and equitable transportation. That can be things like, having micro routes within our city where we run small buses or vans through our municipal budget to connect the various transportation routes that are part of the MBTA. We need to make sure that we're subsidizing T-passes and hopefully making T-passes free for as many residents as possible to incentivize and make it easier for folks to access public transportation. And we need to creatively increase our access to green space. And importantly, if we're gonna meet these goals, we have to name that the climate crisis is a symptom of our cutthroat capitalist society, and it doesn't exist in isolation. We need to address climate in concert with other solutions for other crises facing our society, including racism and massive economic inequality. So a Green New Deal for Somerville is the way that we get jobs, we support workers to transition in this economy, and we reach the goals that we need to in order to preserve our healthy planet.
Thank you, Tessa. Todd.
So I agree with what both other candidates stated, and there's lots of things on the table that we can do to help us get to where we need to go. That being said, we're at an opportunity with our coming administration to look at how we operate as a city. We will use our fresh eyes and new perspectives to do an audit on what we actually can control and what we can be as an example to our community as far as pushing the agenda forward. There are lots of best practices out there that have used around the world. Are we using those? Can we implement them here? How do they affect us on the ground and getting the results that we want? That being said, we need to be able to show the population that by doing these changes that help us get to our climate goals, that by putting the investment in, we get the return what we want, and we're doing our part to help out the climate and the community.
Great, thank you, Todd. Our next topic is police funding. There has been a call to defund the police here in Somerville in light of concerns over serious abuse of powers across the nation and within our own community. If we were to reduce funding for the police, what powers of the police department should be transferred to other unarmed authorities, and how would you just redistribute the funding? Tessa, you are up first.
All right. So the basis with which I approach this concept, this idea, is that the role of policing in our society has greatly expanded. We have systematically disinvested in other social programs, and so police are responding in many situations that fall outside of the role of law enforcement, which is what the police are meant to do. And this approach is not meeting the needs of our community. It's punitive rather than wellness centered, and it's expensive for our community. So I would really like to see us redirect funding from the police budget into a few different ways. One is to invest in preventative measures. This is where can we be proactive to make sure that we are meeting the needs that our community has in advance of an emergency. This is things like moving money into the budget for the Office of Housing Stability, support to reduce food insecurity, supports for unhoused folks, and increase access to preventative mental health care. Then I would like to reallocate some funds from the SPD budget into non-police emergency response systems. And we've seen examples of this across the country that work. And this means that when there is an emergency, if it is the type of emergency that does not need somebody to show up with a gun in order to support the person in that crisis, it could be handled by somebody outside of the police department, such as a paramedic, a mental health counselor, or a social worker. And the SPD right now handles a very high number of opioid overdoses, mental health crises, and are often supporting unhoused folks. And in many, many of those cases, it could be handled outside of the police department in an emergency response. And so I think if we do both of those strategies, the preventative and the emergency response, we're gonna be able to meet the needs of our community much better than we are right now. It'll be more affordable, and police will really be able to focus on what they are trained to do and enter law enforcement to do, which is stop violent crimes and enforce the law.
Thank you, Tessa. Todd.
So what I'd like to see happen is, again, an audit of the department led by the Office of Racial and Social Justice. I'd like to know where our police department is as far as its behavior. We should be able to find out through metrics and data how they've interacted with the public in ways that are able to, we can disseminate the information and tell people that, yes, there are places where the police department is acting properly, and we should continue to have them supported with the resources that they need. In areas where their skill set isn't needed, maybe we should reallocate monies to maybe the health department and other services to then send people to address the issues that do happen to go to the police department. You know, one thing that we need to be mindful of is how do they relate to the current environment here in Somerville specifically? You know, there's a lot of things going on in the country, and what happens in another part of the country might not necessarily fit into how we live and operate here in Somerville. So comparing the data of what goes on in another community and how they've implemented other things might not necessarily fit here. That we need to be mindful of how any changes or reductions that we make to the department and add to other departments to help these problems impact the residents in the businesses in a way that we want to have happen.
Thank you, Todd. Bea.
So I want to go right on to a big issue that police tend to address, and I've been reading a lot about this, and it's about mental health. And that's where somewhere our community is lacking in so many ways. We don't have enough psychiatric beds. We don't accept mental health as an issue. And as someone who has many members of my family who suffer from mental health, a lot of times mental health projects itself with violence, and it requires a certain skill set to know how to address that. I have, unfortunately, the personal experience of an uncle who attempted suicide, who I know would be very violent. The police came in, they hurt his arm, And, that really put him downhill. That was his first suicide. And later on, it caused him to have a final suicide attempt. And I think that resounds in me in that how we really need to address this issue. But I want to talk 1 second and pause and say when we talk about police and issues, we always think of it as addressing systemic racism, and we need to address all our institutions. And that's why I'm talking about mental health. We need to talk about how in our entire society, not just the police, we evade the issue of mental health. And we have to be more aggressive, and we need to be accepting in our schools, in our jobs, and everywhere else. It's not just the police. I also want to emphasize that there are social workers out there. When I was talking to a social worker, she said, Bea, I would never show up without a police next to me. So we need to be having a dialogue with those involved to tell us what is right and what is wrong. Yes, can we make a better police? Of course. Can we redistribute our funds better? Likely. But let's have an honest and truthful conversation about the issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea. Our next topic is business and neighborhood development. What is your vision for Lagoon Square, Ball Square, and Porter Square? And what would you see your role as Ward 5 councillor in issues that impact these business districts and the surrounding neighborhoods, taking into consideration the upcoming opening of the new Green Line stations in 2 of those squares? Todd, you are up first.
So one of the concerns that I've heard from people is what's going to happen to the neighborhoods directly abutting the new T-stop. People are concerned about density, and density comes in many different forms. It could be building density, it could be more people, more traffic. That being said, is our neighborhood able to handle the density that might come with the opening of the T-stop? How will we best handle them? Increased density will put pressures on the community and the neighborhood that is a quality of life issue. Are we going to be able to do things that are inclusive and sustainable with new build outs that might happen in the neighborhood and in the squares due to the increased populations coming in? We need to make sure that we reach out into the community and ask them what they want to have happen in the ward. It shouldn't be directed coming from City Hall. There's lots of ideas coming from the community now as far as what they're looking for. Do they want the changes that might come with them? So there has to be a dialogue as soon as possible when we're talking about development and things of those natures.
Thank you, Todd. Bea?
So I'm glad you bring up this topic, because preserving our local businesses is top in my agenda. Local businesses are what form our urban fabric, and our immigrant community. We have many immigrant communities. That's how they first start off in our economy and become business leaders. So I think the preservation and the fear, I think we need to look at how we can preserve our local business. They can stay here, because with increased development, we're going to end up with Harvard Square with a lot of banks. We don't want that. I was just recently at a community meeting where people said, before a bank, I'd rather have a gas station where there's a local immigrant owner owns it. Okay. And we need that character. We need to preserve that. We need to also reimagine our squares, because they were made for, they're right now designed for cut through traffic. We need to imagine these as plazas, of places of gathering. Like right now, Broadway is a freeway. We need to look at how we narrow down, how we open up the sidewalk in there. And we need to work with our local merchants, because they have deliveries, okay? They need to, and they have people that need to come in, and we have maybe elderly who need to come by car. So we need to have a long and strong conversation with them. But I think, again, also when Todd talks about density, we need to understand what's the density and what fits with our character. Do we want a 25-story building? That's density. But does it fit with the character of our community? No. So we need to create a balance here of allowing growth, but preventing displacement and also preserving the character of our urban fabric and of allowing community to happen. We want to build communities. It's very important.
Thank you, Bea. Tessa.
Yeah, so, we're going to have 2 new T-stops in Ward 5 and 1 right across the border into Ward 3. So change is going to come to our community. It's happening. And the question I really think is what that change is going to look like and who's going to make the decisions around that. What I would really like to do on the city council is have a much clearer community process, including, as I mentioned before, community benefits agreements, where workers and residents are really negotiating what these changes look like. Because, Ball Square and Magoon Square are unlikely to look the way that they look right now in 5 or 10 years. That's just the way change happens, and we've seen that across our city. What I think we can do is learn from the lessons of Harvard Square, Davis Square, where the change was not as intentional, and we can move differently this time around. And that is going to take real courage and leadership and real community engagement. So some specific things that I'd really like to see in any, commercial and business development that's coming into these areas along with the Green Line is for workers to be really centered in the decision making and in how we are giving out permits and licenses. So I would really like to see more worker-owned co-ops moving into those spaces. I would really like to see more funds to support immigrant-run businesses to move into those spaces and to offset the rising cost of rent for the businesses that are there. As the Green Line is coming in, inevitably rents are going to rise. We need to really make sure we are, forwarding worker-centered policies like enforcing the wage theft ordinance. So as more businesses are opening, we are making sure that people aren't basically having their wages stolen by their purveyors of the stores or restaurants where they work. We need to make sure that we're prioritizing worker-owned businesses or businesses that are unionized in how we give out our permits so that we can really incentivize worker-centered businesses to invest in our community and add to the wealth and the richness of the people who live in our community.
Thank you, Tessa. Our next topic is around balancing priorities as city councilor. It's a multi-part question, so I'm happy to repeat it if needed. There has been a lot of public discussion about the job of city councilor in Somerville in terms of the time demands, stress, the lack of staff, and the fact that in Cambridge, city councilor is a full-time job with a salary of $90,000 and a 30-hour-a-week staff person for each city councilor. What would you advocate for in terms of the city councilor position, keeping those facts in mind? How will you manage the competing priorities in the job, which includes constituent services, big citywide issues, and policy initiatives you want to advance? And how would you prioritize what you spend your time on? Do you want me to repeat that? Bea, you're next.
Okay.
You're first.
I'll give it a stab straight on. Let's see. This is
all right.
First, I think we better be honest. Our issues are becoming more complicated. And I think we really need to consider making the city council position a full-time position. I've worked in Cambridge. I've worked in Boston. I know how they work. If they can't come to a meeting, they send others in their place to be aware of the issues. So I'm going to start off with that. But in terms of establishing priorities as a city councilor, I'm going to bring my experience from Massport, where we did strategic planning. What that meant is you first assess the situation. You decide, what is my plan? What are my priorities? Then you establish goals, and then you establish strategies to implement those goals. We need to have a strategic plan and not a ad hoc reactionary. And I work in healthcare. That's what we do too. We do a crisis assessment and we say, what are the most important things and strongest issues? I also, as a city councilor, understand that you need to be in contact with your constituents, especially as a ward counselor. I have made it a point to knock on as many doors as I can personally and get to know my neighbors. Because when a constituent has an issue, you need to be hands-on and you need to visualize the issue. I'm an architect. I gotta see things. I gotta observe things. So to do your job well, you have to be able to hit the street and look at things and analyze and understand how to address the issues. That's an important skill I will bring. And again, also, you need to work on issues. You need to build support. You need to work as a community. You cannot work as an individual. So you have to work with your fellow city councilors to build support. And you need to understand how you're going to portray the story, how you're going to give the message out to the community to get the support. That's another thing I learned at Massport. Policy is not just policy. It's how you tell the story, how you make the argument. And you also think about everybody who's affected. I would be in a Connolly Terminal design review project for Massport, and my boss would say, "Did you think of the little lobsterman at the corner?" And that's the kind of city councilor I want to be. I want to be thinking about everybody who's affected when I'm looking at the big picture. And then I make the decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea. Tessa, you're up next.
You say the question one more time so it's fresh in my
Sure,
mind,
absolutely. There has been a lot of public discussion about the job of a city councilor in Somerville in terms of the time demands, stress, the lack of staff, and the fact that in Cambridge, city councilor is a full-time job with a salary of $90,000 and a 30-hour-a-week staff person for each city councilor. So the first part is, what would you advocate for in terms of the city councilor position? How will you manage the competing priorities in the job, which includes constituent services, big citywide issues, and policy initiatives you would want to advance? And how will you prioritize what you spend your time on?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we are a large city at this point with complex needs and a diverse and population that is diverse and has a diversity of needs. And so it is clear that the role of counselor and really the role of in all of our government needs to grow to meet the needs of our community. So that is very, very clear to me. I think what I'll focus on here is really around staffing. So currently City Council has no staff. They have no legal staff. So when there is a legal issue, the City Council has to actually go to the city's lawyer. And that is, really a breakdown in the check and balance in the democracy in our city. And so currently under charter review, they are considering including staffing and legal staffing for City Council. And that is something that I think is absolutely crucial. And the other piece to this is that oftentimes city councilors are given the information that they request in order to make decisions with very little lead time from the city. And so I think we do need to have some more structure and some more guidance around how quickly city departments need to turn around information to city councilors. If you get a huge report from a city department 2 hours before a city council meeting, you're not going to be in a position to make a vote that is informed. And that is really not going to serve our community. So those are two things that I think immediately need to change in order to put the council in the position to make the best decisions possible. I'll also add, in terms of managing priorities, for me, this is something that I take incredibly seriously. I'm really running here as an extension of organizing work that I've been doing in the city. And I take really seriously how accountable I am to my neighbors and to the residents of Ward 5. And I think I've shown in the way that I'm running my campaign that I can prioritize this. And I can figure out how to juggle these pieces. We've knocked thousands of doors as a campaign. I've had hundreds of conversations with residents, and that's something that I want to make sure that I'm continuing to do when I'm in office.
Thank you, Tessa. Todd, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I'm good, thank you. I believe that a counselor's primary role is constituent services, especially the way our city is designed, being broken up into separate wards. We need to listen to our constituency. We need to advocate to our constituent. We need to respond to our constituency, and we need to inform our constituency of what's going on. the city does a pretty good job at informing us on certain things, but we need a conduit to be able to get it down to the people. So it's our job as counselors to do what we need to do, having meetings, doing face-to-face time, to inform our residents as far as what's going on up at City Hall. The contact that we have and the interactions that we have with the residents is important, because what I've found is that people have issues, and sometimes they feel like they're the only ones that have the issue. And I've said to them, if you're the one saying it to me, there's actually probably another person, and there usually is another person that has the same issue. What I would then do is bring it up to the larger council and address it there. And by doing so, I'm informing the rest of the councilors on that, you know, we have this issue. I'm sure the issues that I have in the ward are probably the same issues that they're having in other parts of the ward. So the primary role of the counselor is servicing the residents, and that's, I believe, priority one. Addressing city issues is being a part of the greater collective. And then as far as policy, again, if it's coming from the bottom up, my job is to disseminate the information so we get attention to it, so we can push it forward and address the issues that are coming from the down below.
Thank you, Todd. Our next topic is support for our aging population. Somerville is increasingly becoming a harder place in which we can maintain the rich diversity that makes up our community. One group of people impacted is our aging population. As a city councilor, how would you provide better support for our older adults so that they can remain in Somerville with dignity, quality care, and independence? Tessa, you are first.
All right. Everybody deserves to retire with dignity and respect. This is a conversation I have on the doors frequently, talking to older folks who've lived most, if not all of their lives in our city, and who are concerned about being displaced, you know, in the last several years of their life. And to me, that is a disgraceful place to be in as a community, and we need to take some really strong action around that. Massachusetts has the second highest financial insecurity amongst elders in the nation. And this is because of healthcare, and it's because of the cost of housing. So the housing solutions we were talking about earlier are really going to support folks who are older to stay in their homes. And specifically, some things I'd like to do to support that is to really provide to focus on the residential exemption as a model when we think about our policies that we're implementing in our city. There's a very big difference between, increasing taxes or increasing expectations on an absentee landlord or on a large developer than there is on an older person who maybe lives upstairs and rents the unit below, and that's what they're living on for their retirement. And we need to acknowledge this. We need to make sure that we are taking bolder steps to curb displacement, including subsidizing bills and taxes for people on fixed incomes. We need to think about services we provide as a city, and that includes things like snow removal. I can't tell you how many older folks I talk to who are saying they're physically unable to remove snow, and the snow plows are piling it up on their driveways. We need to shovel sidewalks in our city. That is part of how we make our city accessible for people who have all sorts of mobility challenges, including folks who are older. And we need to increase elder care services throughout the city. We have other organizations that do this, CAS, Somerville Elder Services. We need to invest in those programs and expand them. We have limited access to assisted living communities in this city, and we need to support people to stay in their homes as long as possible and get the care and support that they need.
Thank you, Tessa. Todd, you are up next.
So what I've heard from the seniors at the door is that they feel like they've been excluded from the conversations going on in the city. The city needs to do a better job at informing the senior population of the changes that are coming and how they're going to affect them. One of the big issues that comes up is parking. I met with an 81-year-old resident on Rogers Street, and her concern was paying her water bill. She goes, it's been 75 years since I rode a bicycle. I know they want to implement bike lanes, but I'm not going to start riding my bike now. So we need to be mindful of new initiatives that we put in place, and we need to be doing a better job informing why we're doing these things, and then making sure that we have adequate opportunities that allow the seniors to operate in the city without feeling like their quality of life has changed. We need to make sure that the Council of Aging is staffed and funded properly, and that they provide better wraparound services. Again, relying on other nonprofit service organizations in the city to help with informing and educating and assisting our senior population. We need to look at what we can do to help mitigate costs, especially the water and sewer bill. I hear that a lot from everybody, and especially seniors, that we get these increased costs, but they can't keep up. We need to figure out a way to offset some of those costs to the seniors.
Thank you, Todd. Bea, you are up next.
Well, I love this conversation because I used to have Abuela Day and used to take care of my abuelas, and they're dear, and the elderly are dear to me. They're what made this city. This is what they are, who made our history, and they need to be brought to the table. As I've knocked door to door, just like Todd, I've heard, we're not part of the discussion. And I always say, if we're going to talk equity, we have to include our elderly. That being said, I think we need to really take accessibility seriously. Accessibility is not about that 5% of ADA, it's our elderly. I walk with my 80-year-old father through Somerville, especially like Davis Square, and I'm like, oh my God, he's gonna fall. Oh my God, hip surgery. We can't, our elderly need to get out and be outside. We need to make safe sidewalks for them. And just the same way traffic safety is, they need to get out there and get around. We also need to integrate our elders in our society. We need to have our youth. We already have the snow shoveling program with our high school. I say we expand this, okay? I learned so much from my grandparents. I used to take them to doctor's appointments as a high schooler. I used to take them to the supermarket and walk as slow as possible in the aisles and yell at anybody who wanted to pass them. I said, you're gonna be there, stop it, okay? So I think we need to engage them, and I agree with Todd. We shouldn't be pretending on working on nonprofits out there. We need to have services right here, and we need to make them aware of those services, what is available. We also need to think about climate change and the impact on our elderly. Many elderly live on older homes. They pay utility bills, and they're paying out the window because it's probably the hot air is blowing out their doors. We need to help them upgrade their homes. And again, any policy discussion, we need to think about elders. They have a finite income. Anything that changes impacts them incredibly. It's not only their income is final, their medical bills are going up. Have any of you gone to the pharmacy to pick up your parents' bills and seen how high they are? This is an issue.
Thank you, Bea. Our last topic before closing statements is on immigration. As a city councilor, what specific measures would you take to help families engaged in immigration visa applications and in their overall quality of life as they integrate into our community? Todd, you are up first.
So I have to be honest with you, I do not know a lot about this subject matter. The city has done a good job trying to help people in need of immigration status issues. We should be doing what we can to help these people out, get to the status that will allow them to operate safely in the city. We need to look at other places that are also trying to help these populations out and see what best practices are used there and see how we can implement them here. We want to make sure that the people that are living here are included in our community, and we are able to provide the services that everybody else is able to get. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Bea.
Well, another dear to my heart issue, as I'm part of Padres Latinos de Somerville, which is a group that formed during the COVID crisis to advocate for our immigrant communities. We found there were lack of cultural understanding, lack of language inclusion. And I think what I wanted to pause 1 second and remind ourselves that helping our immigrants is not just bring them food and some clothes. It's about helping them progress in our society. Our school systems are not doing the best. We have a 10 to 15% gap in our school systems. They barely have role models in our schools. They don't know after school exists. We don't speak their language. We just started translating. We need to understand all the cultural needs and understand and work together as a community to help our immigrants progress. And I want to start a new standard. We have net zero for our buildings. We have vision zero for our traffic. Let's start this. For our schools, I want a vision zero. No gaps, absolutely no gaps. Our schools do this report of decreasing how we're decreasing dropout rates. But when you start looking at statistics of language and our Latino communities, that gap is still there. It hasn't decreased. So we have to be very honest about what's going on in our community with our immigrant populations. In terms of legal status, we need to inform them what resources. That's what we're finding for Padres Latinos. They don't know what the resources are out there. And that's because we're not communicating in their language. We're not communicating in their mediums. We're not working with community leaders. There's a group, I want to give Summer Viva great credit. They're wonderful, but we need to do more. It's not enough. This community seems to be satisfied with the status quo, and I am not. And I will fight like nobody's business for our immigrant community. I get it more than you think. I might be a US citizen, but I understand what you're discriminated for because of your language and your culture.
Thank you, Bea. And Tessa.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think this is an issue that we need to address with, again, all the tools we have at our disposal. So one piece to this is access to what is already there, making sure that there's translation at all of our meetings, thinking about the times that our meetings are at, making sure all the materials we have for our community are available in multiple languages, creating ambassador programs where folks who are embedded and connected to the different immigrant and language communities we have in Somerville are paid through our city to do outreach and engagement work. Because that is the best way to reach people who are either mistrustful of our institutions or who just have never had any reason to come into our institutions because it hasn't served their needs. So really investing in community engagement is something that I would very much like to see us invest, good dollars in across the board and across the board of our programs. When we talk about immigration, we also need to think about the root causes of why there are gaps in sort of who has access to wealth, to housing, to decision-making, to power, and really begin at the root. And this connects to all of the other issues that we've been talking about. When we talk about housing, when we talk about food, when we talk about education or transportation or climate justice or an equitable economy and options for work, immigration is part of that conversation. Because when we really build a community that is grounded in care, that is grounded in supports, we aren't supporting everyone, including immigrants. And that is the kind of community that I think we can be here in Somerville if we're willing to invest in that way. I also think it's incredibly important when we talk about, new immigrants and really anyone who carries a marginalized identity that we think about fair housing. And housing discrimination is a very real thing in our city and in cities across the United States, despite it being illegal. It still happens, and we need to build mechanisms to report instances of housing discrimination, to have legal counsel when that happens, so that people can find adequate housing and aren't being discriminated against. And finally, we need to expand voting to all residents so that everybody can vote in our municipal elections. It doesn't matter if you're a citizen or not. If you live in this city, you deserve to have a say in how our city is run, how our city is governed, and who is representing you. So I would really like to see the voting age decrease down to 16 and made for all residents.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you. We are now at closing statements. So for each of you, Bea, Todd, and Tessa, reflecting on what you shared and heard from the other candidates this evening, how would you differentiate yourself as the best candidate for Ward 5 City Councilor? And we will start with Bea.
Well, I want to start this. I started my career in affordable housing, working with communities of color in Boston. I was shocked then by the inequities I saw and like how we have left behind a whole population and deprived them economic opportunities. 25 years later, with the COVID crisis, I was reminded of these injustices. And that's when I started speaking up for our Latino community. I am a person who sees an injustice and speaks up. I don't hold back. I know we made injustice, but as I'm working with my campaign, I'm still working with Padres Latinos to make our Latino communities aware of after school programs. When someone calls me and says, we need to get a kid in a summer program because the mom needs to go work in New Hampshire, I will call the mayor. I won't hesitate. That's the kind of candidate I am. And I will work so hard on this. And I want to say representation matters. I'm a bilingual, I'm a bicultural woman. I have lived injustices. I have lived inequity, but that also, you know what I have lived? An greater understanding of the world. I have had to adapt to a different culture, and I am going to be willing to listen to all the perspectives. I ask for your vote for me because I'm going to share your values. I'm open to your own values. I am going to bring a set of professional and skills that I don't think others in city council will share. I have worked in affordable housing. I have worked with existing buildings. I have worked in strategic planning. And I work in complex projects in healthcare where we constantly need to quickly reinvent ourselves and react. And that will make me ready to serve on day one. I'm not, of course, I will still need to learn. You always need to learn and you should never be arrogant. So I look forward to working with all of you to make an equitable, sustainable community. And I'm going to say something. I'm not going to say when I talk about immigrants, I'm willing to invest. I say we have to invest in our immigrants. It is just unjust. And I end with that note.
Thank you, Bea. Tessa.
We are in an unprecedented moment, sort of as a planet, and as a country, and as a community. As I said in my opening remarks, we are at a crossroads moment, and we need leadership that is going to meet that moment. And I have been as transparent and clear as I possibly can about the specific strategies that I think are necessary to make the kind of bold changes that we need in this city. I am the only candidate here who has come out clearly saying that I'm going to push for a Green New Deal for Somerville. I'm the only candidate here who said we're going to invest our municipal dollars in building more affordable and social housing. I'm the only candidate here who's put a tenant right to counsel as a #1 thing that I'm going to fight for. And I think these specific policies and these specific things that folks are that I as counselor and that the council writ large needs to stand up and fight for are what residents are looking for in this moment. We know the issues that face us. We have been having conversations about them, doing studies, assessing and gathering information for a long time. There is, of course, more room to learn and grow, but we have the information that we need to act and make substantive change for people now. And people in our community are struggling and they want leadership that is going to step up and do something about it. And I think that I really bring the understanding and the clarity to bear, as well as the experience. I have been organizing in Somerville and surrounding communities since the day I arrived here, because to me, that's what it means to be an engaged community member. My entire career is in organizing and community engagement, and that's the kind of city councilor that I want to be.
Thank you, Tessa. And Todd.
We will see a lot of new faces in city government after this election. What our Somerville needs now is city council with people that are focused on our local needs right here, right now. We should be talking about Somerville public schools, development and traffic, and housing affordability and density with the same urgency we apply to broad scale national equity platforms. As a councilor, I will stay focused where our local government should be, right here in the city. That being said, I think what differentiates me from the other two is my experience and involvement with different groups within the city. I've had the opportunity to do so, and I've seen them operate in ways that will be used to help us push initiatives forward. I believe my skill set in coming from the service industry will also help in allowing the constituents to have access to me to be able to bring those things that they need forward. Election day is September 14th. I'm here today asking for your vote. I hope I can count on your support with my campaign for Ward 5 City Councilor. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. That concludes our forum tonight. Thank you to all those who contributed a question. I only wish we had more time to get to all of them. And everyone, please take yourselves off mute for a minute to give a big round of applause for our guests, Tessa, Todd, and Bea. Thank you for your time in helping us to better understand your vision for Somerville. Recording will be made available shortly, if not this evening, tomorrow. Have a terrific evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.